You're listening to Ecto Portal, a journey into the unknown with Anthony Anderson and Verna Wilson.
I hope that you are seated comfortably with the light turned down and the curtains drawn.
Hello once again to another journey into the unexplored, the unexplained Ecto Portal. I'm Anthony Anderson, your host, and I'm here with my co-host,
Verna Wilson. Hi, everybody.
Hello once again. And then if you're looking for real estate, we were just talking about this. Real estate perhaps in New York, if you needed a new apartment or a new house or a new condo.
Look into the history, folks.
You might want to look into the history of the place before you decide to take it and move in. Because you never know what's happened in some of these old places, especially brownstones in Brooklyn, which is the subject of our current episode this week, The Ghosts of Sackett Street. I'm always fascinated by ghost stories of buildings that are contemporary and still exist. Because even though the ghost story may have happened 10 years ago, 5 years ago, people still live there currently who may have had their own experiences, who don't talk about them, who don't share them with newspaper articles or friends or family or anyone because they don't want to deal with it.
And the neighbors may still remember what happened.
Exactly. So you never know. Any place you can investigate that's still standing, that has a history and is currently still there and still being used, you never know what's going to happen to that particular place. We're going to go ahead and start this off. This is an article by Xavier from his site, ghosttheory.com. Great website. If you haven't checked it out, there's a lot of interesting stories, old and new.
Oh, that's a great site. Yeah.
Very good. Great stuff there. From the outside, 455A Sackett. Seems like an ordinary Brooklyn brownstone, unassuming and uninviting. You wouldn't look twice at the building if you were to pass by. However, to those few people that know, there is a dark history associated with the building. A history of unexplained fires, disembodied voices of children, and other unimaginable tragedies has plagued the building and several former tenants. On April of 1998, Jane and her family moved into the brownstone, unaware of its dark history.
I wrote about this briefly in a prior article in 2001. To recap, we moved into 455A Sackett Street when I was 14 years old on April 1st, 1998. From the moment we moved in, something was so not right. It was an incredibly dark apartment, though we should have been thrilled because it was the first apartment we'd ever had with more than one floor. There were 3 floors, including the basement, and it was nice if you could ignore the feeling of someone standing just behind you or staring at you wherever you went. Within 2 weeks of moving in, I was raped in my own bedroom by a man from the neighborhood. An elderly woman who lived right next door for most of our life informed us that no one had occupied our apartment for more than a year at a time since as long as she can remember. She also related that terrible tragedies befell all of said people within only a few weeks of moving in, continuing through the day that they moved out. Though we all had eerie feelings in the apartment, we'd not notice anything too weird. The apartment was very uninviting, cold and damp. We tried to decorate it, warm it up a little, but nothing helped. Another thing was that no matter what we did, we could not get a phone installed. We had the phone company over about 4 times to fix the wires, but no matter what they did, we could get absolutely nothing, not even static, so we were pretty isolated.
After that, my neighbor confided in us that strange things have always gone on in my building. In the 30s or 40s, a fire killed a little boy within a month of the family moving in. In the 60s, a couple was whacked by the mob because of some insidious affair. There were no records because the church's records had been burned in a fire, so we couldn't get any more information than what people said. Now, there are other things that happened. A friend of mine coming into my apartment and seeing a little boy in burnt rags staring at her in the bathroom mirror. She ran out crying and refused to set foot in my apartment again. Another friend slept over. Both friends were not told of prior experiences, and they awoke in the middle of the night swearing that she saw a woman walk into my room through the door. We moved out a year to the day later as soon as we could find a new apartment. We found out some more after that. The people that moved in after us tried to renovate the basement and found the body of a little boy in the wall. They left suddenly one night not too long after and never returned. And another couple moved in and left as inexplicably as the last, and so on and so forth to this day.
Since then, we met a woman who'd gone to my mother's office. She's a nurse that works in a doctor's office because of a nervous condition. My mother noticed the address on her insurance card didn't match the one listed, and the woman explained that she had only lived at 455A Sackett Street for a few months and had to leave because her mother had died along with various other tragedies from the first week of moving in. My mother asked if the woman ever noticed anything weird. Well, the woman explained exactly what we'd gone through, perhaps the cause of her condition. We're all fine now. We're happy to be out of there, and we've moved on. We still see our old neighbor once in a while, and she always says that the best thing that we ever did was move out of that godforsaken house. Needless to say, we agree. We have not been haunted since, and life is good. If there's one thing we learned, I'd say it was to trust our instincts. If you ever get horrible vibes from a place, don't put it off as folly. It might just save you a whole lot of trouble.
Now, having moved out of the brownstone, Jane and her family resumed their normal life. Years later, Jane would post her story in an online forum only to have another former tenant reply with their own harrowing experience inside the same house. I lived in that house for 3 years in 2003. It was the creepiest place I had ever. I had the room that I think was your brother's. It was the size of a small closet. The ceiling still had a bad patch job from where the ceiling probably fell in before. There was also remnants of the fire. I had to remove the radiator from the tiny room, and there was a ton of soot behind it. I never felt safe in that place. Under the porch in the back, there was a small storage room. The entrance was outside under the porch. Me and my roommates went in after the door popped open one day. There was a kneeler altar, like little small altar thing. And no joke, a pair of girls' roller skates with cake on blood and small boys' clothes. It was so creepy, we called it the goat hole. The people that moved in after us, they bought the place, completely gutted it and renovated. I could only imagine what they found in there. To this day, the brownstone's still on the market, and the list of former tenants keeps growing, with most of them not staying for very long. Now, whether you believe Jane's story or not, one thing is for certain, Brooklyn's history is full of dark ghosts.
Now, there's 2 disturbing things about this story. One, she mentioned that within a week of moving in, a man came in and raped her in her bedroom.
Yeah.
Was she talking about a spirit, or was she talking about an actual person?
No, I think she said someone from the neighborhood.
That's terrible. I would have moved out right after that.
Well, what she was pointing out is the weird things that happen to people as soon as they move in and the entire time they live there.
And then they found a body of a boy behind the wall.
In the basement.
In the basement. That would have been enough to call the police and say, look what we found.
Well, they might have at the time. They didn't find the body.
I'm sorry, the person who found it. So those 2 are, to me, are the most disturbing it would be, I mean, because the criminal activity and finding a body of a little boy behind the wall, I mean, that's enough to call the police and really want to find out.
Well, this person lived there, in 2003, and they found the roller skates caked with blood,
right?
Little boys' clothes. It's just
something really ugly happened.
It does. This is interesting. This is a description that now you've seen the pictures. I showed you the pictures,
and it actually looks nice inside.
They flipped the whole place. I think they carved it into two apartments because they said it had 3 floors, a basement and 2 upper floors. So I have a hunch those were just divided into 2 separate apartments. And this is the description the realtor uses now. And this is currently available to rent.
Oh, it is.
So, folks, if you're listening, you could go live at 455A Sackett Street if you perhaps wanted a paranormal encounter or really bad luck. But here's what the realtor describes it as. 455A Sackett Street is located on a tree-lined block in charming Carroll Gardens. This newly renovated and expansive triplex invites gracious living and entertaining with 3 bedrooms and 4.5 bathrooms and multiple outdoor areas. So maybe it is one living unit. The master bedroom has gorgeous Italian Remedizio closets. The bathroom showcase Venetian plaster and mosaic details. 1 floor below is breathtaking open modern kitchen designed by Arclinia, outfitted with a Miele vertical oven and microwave, a Bosch fridge, dishwasher, and a Schultes gas cooktop. The kitchen and shared dining area offer an abundance of natural light from the sliding glass doors leading out to the garden. This room is an exit which leads out to the front yard. The cellar of the home provides space for any use you can imagine, perfect for a gym, home theater, wine cellar, or finding dead people in the walls. Just keep adding that on. A suburban-grade laundry room with full-size Whirlpool washer and dryer is on this level, as well as a bathroom. Additional details include central air conditioning, central heating, and luxurious heated floors. This home comes furnished upon request. So
they made it very appealing.
Yeah, they've clearly flipped the entire place.
Got rid of all the ugly side. Yep. They probably looked to see if there was anything behind these walls.
They probably ripped the walls.
They probably ripped it apart.
Inside the walls out, but left the structure. Most of these places, they rip everything out, keep the basic sound structure, and just build on top of that.
Sure.
But that woman's right, though. Who knows what they might have found in those walls after they tore them out?
Exactly.
And obviously, the building must have caught on fire. Who knows if it's brownstones? Did the whole block catch on fire? How long ago was the fire? Who knows?
And the church was burned, so the records were burned.
And there's a church down the street, so they must have had the fire must have been the same time.
Right. So they couldn't look. They couldn't look to see what was going on back then because they had no records.
Exactly. I imagine if you dug in some of the Brooklyn newspapers and Manhattan newspapers, you might find something.
Or how about some of the city and county records? Not necessarily the church records, but the city and county records. Wouldn't they have something?
I would think so. I mean, especially for a fire or the cause of the fire, you would have an article about what caused this big fire in the neighborhood. Some of that would be written down somewhere in some capacity. As far as the kid in burned rags, does that mean people died in the houses?
Did they say a little boy died in the fire?
Well, they said a little boy was... they saw the little boy with burned clothes that her friend did when she went to stay over at her house.
Yeah, that's awful.
So that tells me maybe something happened. Someone did die in the fire. And to find a dead boy's body in the wall... Let's look at that perspective, because that's not I died in a fire. That's somebody put your body in a wall. Now, they had to have... Maybe they accidentally killed the kid by accident, and they had to get rid of it. And so they put it in the wall in the basement. Would have
been interesting to do the DNA from that corpse and find out who that kid was.
Yeah, and then another thing we'd have to think about is how much is hearsay, how much of this really happened versus, what rumors, innuendo, neighborhood stuff.
Why would someone make that up?
Exactly. And it sounds like the neighbor who lived there forever, she watched pretty carefully everybody who moved in, moved out. She'd be the one to talk to as far as experiences with other tenants.
Wonder if she's still there. It sounds like she's been in that neighborhood forever.
I don't know. That was a while ago now.
Yeah, true.
If that was 2003 and it's 2020 now. That's
Right.
17 years ago.
That was a long time
and she
ago.
was elderly then.
Right.
But you got to wonder how many people have had experiences in this same spot. You know, do they keep seeing this little boy? I mean, even though you flip a place, doesn't necessarily mean the
It
structure's
doesn't
still
mean
there.
anything. Yeah.
So who knows who's around?
Well, and who knows? So, how recent is that listing where it's still for rent?
2 months ago?
2 months ago. So nobody's lived there since then.
No, it's pretty pricey, but I'm sure they priced it because they flipped it.
Uh-huh.
And it is in a nice neighborhood in Brooklyn, so don't get me wrong, it's not a bad place. I'm sure it looks great now. I would, you know me, I wouldn't care. I would move into a place that had history
Of course you would.
because it would be interesting to me. But I'm sure there's people who don't want any of that. They don't want to know any of that. And you were asking before, like, would the real estate agent have to divulge
Right.
these kind of things? Like, was there a fire? Did a child die in the fire? Did somebody else die in the house in a fire? Did somebody else die? Remember they said a mob? There was a mob hit.
right. Yeah.
A mob hit, when they kill, they're not going to necessarily burn the place down, but that means people probably died in there after the mob hit.
Yeah.
And that's common in Brooklyn. I didn't believe that at first when I had a friend in New York who lived in Queens and said, yeah, we see mob hits all the time because the local public swimming pool not far away from where we lived was shut down because the mob hit it, killed so many kids and people, they had to shut the pool down. So the mob does still hit. They don't hit them as much as they used to because I don't think the mob is as prominent.
You
as it
hear
used
more of
to
that
be.
stuff in old gangster tales like the 20s and 30s. I don't think you hear a lot of these hits now.
Not as much.
Not as much.
Even in the 70s, they died down. Into the 80s, they died down. So they still happen, I'm sure. We just don't hear about them as much because they have different ways of doing things.
Right.
But the fact that a mob hit happened in this same house, who knows how much has happened in that whole block of brownstones.
Right.
And maybe the fire was started. Who knows? We don't know.
I'm sure there's history in a lot of these apartments, so they don't really feel like they need to divulge the history because Brooklyn's full of history. They would be divulging history from every apartment if that were the case, maybe.
Exactly. I would do history. I mean, if I knew about this particular house and I moved in, I would want to do history in the block just to see what happened around the neighborhood.
Well, especially if you couldn't keep your tenants.
Yeah, and who moved out last? How long did they stay? The fact that this one person stayed 3 years, it couldn't be that bad.
Yeah, 3 years actually. That's a pretty good record considering everybody. Oh, I moved out after a year.
Which could be.
Yeah.
I mean, different people have different experiences. Some are probably worse than others. But 3 years is a long time. If you lived there 3 years, whatever you lived with it. You accepted it.
Moving's expensive.
It is expensive, especially in Brooklyn and
So,
Manhattan, and you have to have like 2.5 months of down payment.
So the way I see it, if they had to move out in a year, they must have been desperate to get out because moving's expensive.
Yeah, and that was before they flipped it.
Yeah.
So, and then after they moved out, they said, yeah, we noticed that they flipped it. The lady next door said, yeah, it's a good thing you moved out. There's nothing but bad news from people who move in and out of here since you've been gone. I would just be curious, anybody who moves in there who knows nothing about this, because there's anybody who's liable to move in there is not going to know anything about this story.
They're not going to tell them that unless somebody happens to run into it and reads articles like this.
Or here's this podcast and go, oh my God, they're talking about the apartment or this house I rent.
Right, or unless there's other neighbors who are carrying on the stories and saying, hey, guess where you moved in?
Yeah, you're living in a haunted house. I hope you realize when you moved in. Did your real estate agent share that with you?
You never know.
I can. Like I said, I couldn't imagine a real estate agent. If you don't legally have to tell them what happened in an apartment, if you
No,
don't
I
have
mean
to
with the
report-
neighbors. You never know. The neighbors might do that.
Maybe. I mean, any that are left that would know about it or heard about the
Sure.
stories. But you got to wonder, anybody who lived there when the mob hit the neighbors. That woman, she probably lived around there when they hit the neighbors.
Oh yeah, she
wonder if
probably
she knew
did.
it all.
Sounds like she had been there for a long time.
Exactly. I don't know. Would you live in a house like that if you knew the history? Would you move into a place like that if the price
Not
was
if I knew
good?
about it ahead of time, especially the part about finding a kid's body behind
Yeah,
the wall
in the basement, yeah.
and the bloody roller skates. If I knew that ahead of time, I probably wouldn't. No.
But if the price was good and you desperately needed a place
If I
to
desperately
stay,
needed a place and the price was good, I'm sure I could find ways to protect myself because I can do that. But if I don't have to, I wouldn't.
would you do EVPs in the basement?
Probably.
Right when you're doing laundry, right?
I probably would. My curiosity would get me to do that. Yeah.
See, and I would look. Well, obviously the walls are probably covered up.
I
now,
live in an
but
apartment now where it has history, so I don't know the history
Is
of
anybody
it.
buried in your walls, Verna?
Not that I know of.
And have you heard from them? I guess is probably a better question.
But I live in an old apartment now that has history. I don't know the complete history. I've just had one disgruntled neighbor told me that somebody used to live who was very noisy and but that's all I know. But I'm talking about history that goes back years. But
Isn't that weird though? I mean, finding a child's body in the wall, that sounds like a movie plot, doesn't it?
it does.
But you gotta wonder what happened.
I mean, that's extra creepy.
That is extra creepy. And the fact that maybe you saw a boy who died in a fire and there's a fire was there
Well,
was
also,
one thing, but seeing a body being pulled out of the wall of a child
and the
means
bloody
there's a whole story there behind that.
yeah, and the bloody roller skates, and also her incident about being raped
Oh, when she
within
first
a
moved
week.
in?
That shows criminal activity right there. That's not even paranormal activity.
No, but they were just attributing it to the bad luck of people who actually, while they live in that house.
Okay.
But that could have happened on any of those brownstones on that block.
Well, yeah, but it shows in the neighborhood, has some criminal activity
Yeah,
there, and
yeah,
it's
yeah.
not good. And
But I mean, we know what it's like when there's hauntings. People attribute any bad thing that happens to them. They all like to then lump it to the paranormal.
of course they do.
Like,
yeah.
the only reason this stuff's happening to me in my life is because of I'm being haunted. Well, not necessarily. It's just it's easier to pin all these things that happen to you onto that.
So this story can actually be partly paranormal and partly true crime. What really happened?
Yeah, we'll never know what really happened.
Yeah.
At least with the little boy. And with the mob hit, obviously there must be articles about that too.
Yeah, possibly.
And that must have been in, I'm assuming, the 70s or 80s, maybe earlier, who knows.
Yeah.
But that's
I wonder if there's any criminal files about it somewhere. You
I'm
never
sure
know.
there's newspaper articles. Brooklyn,
Sure.
Manhattan, New York Times. But that would be kind of creepy there. I mean, like I said, New York, I don't think they have to divulge if somebody died in your house.
Right.
Other states, including California, you do.
You do,
You
yeah.
definitely have to tell them if somebody ever died in the residence. So I'm pretty sure they would leave all of this out. I read you the listing. Did you hear anything about a dead boy in the wall other than when I added it as a feature?
Right, and they try to make it, and the pictures, they looked very nice, and they made the descriptions sound very appealing. Mm-hmm. So,
Yep.
well, I guess if there is anything more about Sackett Street, you never know. Maybe somebody else will talk about it. We'll see another article, but I honestly, I hope not. I hope somebody lives there, and I hope they live there in peace.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
But it's interesting though. I mean, I'm one that would probably move in just out of curiosity.
Sure.
Not that you're going to have experiences, but it's interesting to me. It's part
Sure.
of history. It's paranormal history,
Right.
but it's still history. And like you said, there's a lot of true crime wrapped up in it.
And we can't live our lives by fear either.
No, we can't.
Yeah.
All right. So anybody who moves into what was it?
Sackett Street, 455A.
Is it 455 or let's see, 455A Sackett Street. Now you know the history of the place. Hope you sleep well. Have guests over, and you can share the tale with them as you sit around and have a glass of wine and consider what might or might not have happened in that particular 3-story house. Brownstone.
Right. Enjoy.
Enjoy. All right. Until next week, folks, we'll say goodbye. Bye.
Bye. See you next week.
Royalty-free, copyright-free music by Kevin MacLeod and Ross Bugden.